This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. This week, Robert and I continue our discussion of George Saunders' essay, What Writers Really Do When They Write. If you haven't heard part one, you can find it at storyworkspodcast.com or wherever you subscribe to this show. Enjoy. One of the things Saunders talks about that I really loved is the needle. He says as he's writing, he imagines a needle on the middle of his forehead with a P on one side and an N on the other side. And with each sentence, he just keeps asking himself, where's the needle pointing? Is it shifting toward the P or is it shifting toward the N? And if it's shifting toward the N, it's no good, so every single sentence, sometimes through hundreds of drafts, he says, you just keep adjusting the prose, keep moving the needle toward the positive side, which is a little bit intimidating and also liberating to hear that, to have someone just say it so honestly. This is a painful process,
So there's that. Is he talking about that? I'm just reading it now. What does he mean by positive? Does he mean better story in your mind, or is it more positively towards the conclusion of what you imagine the climax of the story to be, or is it just that sentence is better?
I think it's all of those things, because he says you're basically trying not to suck. That's all. He says. So, like a cruise ship slowly turning, the story will start to alter course via those thousands of incremental adjustments. So, if you're aiming for, true north, but you're heading northeast because you're sucking or whatever.
Yes.
You got to just go degree by degree by degree. And over time, you're going to end up straightening that course. But it takes time. It's all those incremental changes. I mean, the visual of the cruise ship worked really well for me. I just got that.
Yes.
That idea of covering a real distance and adjusting course as you go.
Yes, I think if I try, I know we're talking about one writer's process, but that and that's fine because we're all individuals. We're all going to have variations. I think if I tried to do that in first draft, I would really trip myself up. I think I know that I really have to dump on the page. Right. I really do. It's tricky. It's true if I start thinking about it too much. I'm okay if I'm not in the mechanical aspect of it. So I could, for example, get up in one of my little breaks if I'm doing Pomodoro, go and get a coffee or something, and that would be fine. I could then be thinking, is this going positively or negatively? But I think in the moment of, I'd struggle.
Right.
But not in revision.
Yeah.
In revision, and he goes on to say, if you revise by the method described, as he's saying, using the needle, and that I love,
right?
Because I think that's where he says, if you're talking about Bob, and if I write Bob was an arsehole, well, why was he? Was he a grieving widower and just chewed out the barista?
Right.
And I like that idea.
Yeah, I do too, and I don't think I definitely don't write that way in first draft. I do know. A few writers who can't write the next sentence until the one they're on is really perfect in their mind for that draft. Not me. That would make me crazy. So whether he's talking about using the needle in first draft or just generally as he works through it and in revision, maybe second draft and on, it gives us permission to obsess and slave over our work, know, and to be imperfect until we've had time to work at it and keep making incremental improvements. It's sort of like, the journey to a great piece of fiction is a long one that takes a tremendous process. It takes effort. It isn't just,
Yeah, oh yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
you're a genius or you aren't. It's incremental changes. It's moving the needle, and being
Definitely.
critical of your own words and really being quite judgmental of what you put on the page, I think.
Yeah, well, that's definitely something that's why I never thought I was a writer. I just thought I was a reader who loved stories, because I could never imagine sitting anywhere and having something so extraordinary spew out of me. And
Right.
I never realized that that's not how it happens. I mean, yes, you have occasional moments where something comes out of it and you think, oh, geez, that was freaking brilliant, that bit. And then you go
Yeah.
back to revise it and you think, nah. uh,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
But it wasn't until I realized that, there's that cliche, there's no such thing as great writing, there's only great rewriting, or whatever the paraphrase thing is, which is a bit unfair. I mean, it sort of trivializes the process, but it is, as
Right.
you say, it is incremental. It is built piece by piece. And when you were talking about that idea of, some people who go back and change a sentence, and until they're happy with it, they won't go on. Or as those of us who will do the crappy first draft, we're both doing the same thing, though. I think in the larger sense, and it might be Stephen Pressfield who said this, that when you finally realise what the theme is of, or that you're trying to achieve with your novel, write a post-it and stick it on the computer in front of you, and every time you get
Yeah.
stuck, use that as your guiding light for the needle. Am I positively moving towards that theme? Is it adding theme, or is it
Yeah.
taking away? And I thought that was really good advice as well.
Yeah, that is really good advice to keep your theme or your sort of story objective front and center all the time. Like visually, physically front and center, not just metaphorically as you write.
Yeah, exactly. And and I think again that whether you're an outliner or a pantser or something in between, we're all aiming for that point of a story. I mean, nobody really wants to write pointless stories.
Right.
Yeah, well, for the most part, I'm sure there are people out there who want to break the mold. I'm going to write something really pointless. I'm going to write about Lincoln sitting in the crypt for days.
That could be a great, microfiction piece. It could be just that tableau. There you go, the visual that sticks with us. But yeah, you couldn't get a
I think
novel out of that without
being Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, without much more. The whole, when I write Bob was an a-hole thing,
Yes.
that I thought was such a great piece. He's talking about, as he revises, he's communicating a sense of respect for the reader. So every time he moves the needle toward the positive side, his story becomes more specific and embodied in the particular. It becomes more sane, less hyperbolic, sentimental, and misleading. It loses its ability to create a propagandistic fog. Falsehoods get squeezed out of it. Lazy assertions stand up, naked and blushing, and rush out of the room. And I'm sure we've all been guilty of each of those sins, being hyperbolic, sentimental, misleading, lazy
Yeah.
in our prose. And to read that, I was like, yeah, okay, there's your goal as a writer, is to not be those things and to be acutely aware as you write. Am I doing this? Am I respecting my reader? Am I respecting the reader's intelligence? Am I, creating an engaging story that is specific and embodied and particular? And, he uses the example of Bob. So, he says Bob was an a-hole, which lacks in specificity. So he says Bob snapped impatiently at the barista, then seeking more specificity as to why Bob might have done that. Bob snapped impatiently at the young barista who reminded him of his dead wife, then added who he missed so much, especially now at Christmas. And Saunders says, I didn't make that series of changes because I wanted the story to be more compassionate. I did it because I wanted it to be less lame. But it is more compassionate. because the character goes from being pure a-hole to being a grieving widower.
Yeah.
So we start seeing him become a person who, instead of just being that flat jerk who you encounter without context or understanding or relationship, now we, as readers, start to have a relationship with him. He becomes more full, a little more like ourselves, because everybody has bad days, everybody snaps, everybody,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's a perfect example of in revision going from showing to from telling to showing as well, because Bob was an a-hole is simply telling the reader, and the reader can make up. I mean, and there may be moments where as we know, there may be moments where that's perfectly fine. But what he's saying here is it lacks some nuance to allow us to understand who Bob is.
Right.
And that was important to the story. Where Bob's got a name for a start, so we already know that Bob's more a character. It's not just a red shirt. And so even the way that Bob was an a-hole is going to be different. I mean, some of us might think, an a-hole is someone who ignores people, or an a-hole is someone who hits, or an a-hole is someone who just forgets important events. But in this particular case, Saunders is saying Bob is an a-hole in my mind as a writer because he did this action, and it brings it to life. And I think that's often forgotten, that it's, again, in first draft, it's okay to be telling in places, and sometimes you even do it in short form. Like there's a scene I've got to write coming up, and I don't know how to solve it, and it's stopping me. And so I just thought this morning, I'm just going to write down, they take the ship back.
Right.
And it's going to end up being 3,000 words, but I'm just going to put that in there because I know I can come back to it when I've got the things either side of it, when I've got the bookends.
Right.
And so it's probably okay to write Bob was an a-hole, because in the revision process, you're going to come back to and say, now, that's not respecting the reader.
Right.
I don't need to tell the reader that. Shakespeare doesn't jump out on stage and say, look, see what Romeo's doing here? I'm clever, aren't I?
Yes.
No, it's all in a nuance. So I thought that was a beautiful example. And he, as you say, he does it in just a few paragraphs here, which is great.
Yeah, he does. And I'm going through something similar with my own fiction. I've got a partial first draft longhand of my next novel, and so I've been typing up scenes, and as I'm typing them, I'm also kind of reviewing what's there, and sometimes I make changes as I type, but sometimes I just type a note right into the manuscript that says, I'm not seeing their faces, more mood, more setting, more like the dialogue's not snappy enough. And then I just highlight those so that, okay, when I get around to the next revision, this is what I need to do. And that's part of that whole process of moving from the bland, the telling, into the specific and moving that needle.
Yes. Respecting
the reader and bringing everything to life,
Yes. There you go. So it's a rich essay. This, I mean, I'd really recommend people. I've read it a couple of times, and I still want to read it again because I really like that.
Right.
He's kind of bearing his artistic soul, and in that he's kind of naming various elements of things that many of us experience when we're trying to write. And there is no perfect solution. So all you can do is kind of take it on board, and it's you can just imagine the artists all sitting around and in the life workshop, with the model in the center, and they've all got their canvases, and they're all sitting there, and they're all holding their thumbs up and measuring it against the model and painting. And then you, as the observer, come in and walk around the room, and they've all made completely different things, but they're all they're all studying the same object. And I think that's really what he's starting to embody in this essay: is what is that object you're extracting, and put your effort into extracting that, as opposed to just trying to paint an object or to write a story.
Yeah, and I think it's good for us to read an essay like this, for us being writers, because we so often do what we do without processing or analyzing what we're doing. And so to read something like this, there can be a sense of camaraderie, like, oh,
Yes.
yeah, he gets it, or he just
Yeah.
put in
Yeah.
words that thing I was feeling but didn't quite understand yet, or yeah, I'm really grappling with, the empathy piece or with the inspiration piece. And so to process what we do can be useful and freeing as well. To say, oh, this is, yeah, phew, okay, I'm not alone. We all have these terrors of the blank page and the needle and the horrible first drafts and everything. Another thing he mentions that I think is worth discussing is the empathetic function. This is something I talk about incessantly, is that we are hardwired for empathy, and that's really what fiction is about. And he says,
Yes.
we often think that the empathetic function in fiction is accomplished via the writer's relationship to his characters, but it's also accomplished via the writer's relation to his reader. Yes, this is everything we write, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Anything you put out there for readers is creating a dialogue. It's in relationship from you to the text, to the reader, back to you from reader to reader. It creates this whole network. And even if you never meet or communicate directly, it still exists. He puts it beautifully.
Yes, he does.
He says, this is a hopeful notion because it implies that our minds are built on common architecture, that whatever is present in me might also be present in you. And he uses the example of reading a Tolstoy story and being moved by it, and how despite the years and the, distance and the culture and everything, we still share that common architecture of being human.
Yes.
That's the empathy piece.
I totally agree. And I think that the respect that you get for your reader by doing that sort of thing, and as he says, it's ultimately about imagining that your reader is as humane, as bright, as witty, as experienced, and as well-intentioned as you.
Right.
And that to communicate intimately with her, you have to maintain the state through revision of generously imagining her. And I think that's really wise advice, because you can get caught up in the brilliance of your own story when it does start coming together.
Right.
And I've heard other writers talk about, and I think Stephen King has probably says this on writing, that it's a bizarre thing that you do because it's a form of delayed telepathy, that you put these words on paper and some months, days, or even years, decades, centuries later, someone's going to read those and experience something that you experienced. And you've generated something in somebody else's mind that is beyond what you experienced on that day. As you say, it's a mode of empathy, but kind of a weird empathy where it's a delayed empathy. And it's one of the most bizarre things that we do. And to me, even more bizarre than other forms of art, because I find visual art, I don't get very well stimulated by visual art, particularly photography a little bit. Musical art I absolutely love, but it's mostly for the emotional roller coaster. But the art that comes from text, because because linguistics is such it's a meta element. All it is code. So we're writing this code down that somebody's going to unpack and put it into their own head. And I think that's why I love reading, because it generates this entire vicarious experience. Right. And the fact that you're putting these words on paper and you're going to generate those vicarious experiences for other people makes me it's where the part of the fear comes in as well, because is it good enough to do that? Yeah. Right. And when you read other magnificent writers who create that experience for yourself, in my mind, that's what's made me thought I can't do that. And then until you realize they don't do that in one sweep. They do that as Saunders describes. They do that by coming back to it and being the reader. I think it is this Is this just dumb, or does it, bring something to life for the reader? So once again, it's packed a lot into one small point.
Yes, and that, I think, is the most beautiful and amazing, just awe-inspiring aspect of fiction, of story. The fact that it does move us, what you were describing was exciting. I was like, yeah, let's go write something, and then, move these readers. The fact that we can emotionally impact a complete stranger across any number of miles or years or, cultures or whatever is pretty astounding. It's pretty wild when you think about the power of words.
The power of the written,
well-crafted stories.
Word, yeah. Yeah. I mean, entire nations have been decimated based on the power of the spoken word, and it's extraordinary. It's persuasive, and I think that's really what Saunders is getting to, is by being close to our process and not trivializing it. We allow ourselves to become the artists that we really want to become, as opposed to just trying to think, I've got to get these brilliant words on the page. Right. And so I like that.
Well, with awe and thanks for this essay, I think we'll wrap it up there.
Yes. It made me want to read Lincoln in the Bardo, by the way, as well.
Oh, absolutely. Just reading this. Yeah. It's been on my to-read list for a while. All right, that is it for this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Come over to the Storyworks Writers Facebook group. Let us know what you think of this essay, George Saunders, What Writers Really Do When They Write. It's online at The Guardian. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.